old Sporting News and Street and Smiths have kind of merged into one magazine, and hence Bill Bender of the Sporting News writing for Street and Smiths. Hey, Bill.
Hey, how's it going? Thanks for having me on.
Good to have you back on again. So what do folks need to know about this year's magazine? I teased it just a little bit. The edition we get out this way has Eno Benjamin, Khalil Tate, and Zach Moss up in the corner. What's new, what's different, what's exciting inside this year's preseason mag?
Oh, that's always a go-to. I mean, there are so many good ones. Phil Steele does a good job. I like Athlon, and this is that time of year where we read the magazines, check out our preview. We have all that stuff in there, depth charts, bowl projections, previews, All-American teams. I had some features in the front as usual, and it's always an honor to be doing that because it was always one of my favorite things to do as a kid.
So as we look at it and kind of look across the previews here, you've got your top 10, preseason top 10, preseason top 25. Top Pac-12 team is Oregon at number 10. Utah comes in at number 21, which you told me, I think the last time you were on with me, might be just a skosh low for them. But you guys do have Utah projected to win the Pac-12 South, which, by the way, surprised me. You've got UCLA finishing second in the South this year.
Yeah, I think that's Chip Kelly and that offense. They have a lot of potential and a lot to prove, but I think the second year in that system, you'll see some better results. And honestly, after Utah, I think you'll see a lot of variation from 2 to 6 in the Pac-12 South because we're not really sure about USC. Arizona and Khalil Tate, they could be a lot better. Arizona State seems to be headed in the right direction. Colorado's kind of still starting over. So it is one of those divisions where it's kind of prime for Utah. I don't want to say don't mess it up, but that's kind of where we're at. If they don't mess it up, they'll probably represent Pac-12 South again.
No, I agree with you, and I think that they're going to be the favorite with a bullet here in the Pac-12 South. They could win the division, I think, by 2 games this year. The schedule is markedly more easy this year than it was a year ago. Last year, you could make a case they might have had the most difficult schedule in the league. This year, Oregon and Stanford drop off. Cal and Oregon State come on. So it's set up for Utah to win the South again. The North is hard to pick. You guys picked Oregon, followed by Washington, Washington State. Make the case for my listeners as to why Oregon's the team for you guys, and you've got them actually playing in the Rose Bowl.
Yeah, I mean, that's a team that definitely it's time for them to do it. I mean, Justin Herbert's there, good recruiting class, favorable schedule. Right off the chute, they'll get some national attention against Auburn. That's a huge game, not just for Oregon, but I would argue the entire conference. And they should be very talented. I mean, that's not sleeping on Washington. I mean, if Jacob Eason's more accurate, they'll be just as good as they were last year. Then I'm saying more accurate than he was at Georgia. And then, Washington State's always the X factor, but I've kind of holding them on a standard of I'll believe it when I see them beat Washington, which we didn't see that last year when they had another good chance at it.
Yeah, Oregon, I've said this, they're going to get a lot of preseason love. I don't quite get it. I've got to see it. I know Justin Herbert's back. That recruiting class is good, but I want to see it, maybe a year from now. I've got to see who the playmakers are for Herbert, too. For me, and I think I've told you this, too, I think Utah's the team to beat in the league because they've got the fewest questions. They return the most talent, running back, quarterback, things like that. They've got a couple of questions like everybody does. But their schedule, I think, is even more favorable than Oregon's because the South isn't very good, and they dodged 2 of the top 4 teams in the North, and they've got Wazoo at their place. So that, for me, is kind of how I see it, and I don't see an X factor outside of maybe Washington State. I think Stanford will be okay. They've got to replace Arcega-Whiteside. They've got to replace Bryce Love. They've got to replace a bunch on offense. Costello's a really nice quarterback, but I don't know who his playmakers are going to be just yet. So I kind of agree with you guys having them 4th in the North.
Yeah, I mean, Stanford's kind of that team that you don't want to count them out. And, that we get this far into talking and we're not mentioning Stanford at this point, that's kind of indicative of where they go. I think they'll go with KJ Costello in some ways because not having Bryce Love, more committee approach him in the backfield, he's got to make some play with his arm. And their offensive line is going to be really good, though. So I think they're another team that can beat anybody on any given week. I think the trick, whether it's the North or the South, is can you get a team out of the Pac-12 with 2 losses or less? Because in this 4-team format, and you and I have talked about this at length, I mean, we haven't seen a 2-loss team in the playoff yet, regardless of what your schedule is. So how do you get a team to get a little bit of a national run and not lose 2 games. I think that's the secret to getting back in.
Completely agree. I think even a one-loss Pac-12 team this year is going to be, holding its breath and starting to compare resumes. You go undefeated, you're going to be in. An undefeated team in a Power 5 conference is not going to get left out of the playoff. But whether it's Utah or Washington or Oregon, if you've got one loss, I don't think that still guarantees you. And again, it's going to depend on what happens in other conferences too. Utah's schedule is very favorable, but unless if their loss is Washington at Washington, okay, that's not a bad loss. If you lose to somebody else and maybe lose a home game, that's not a good loss. So we've discussed that here on this show at length. But I think Utah's got a really good chance to win the Pac-12 conference this year. And by winning the Pac-12 conference, people are like, well, you can't talk playoffs. I said, well, you can, because if you win a Power 5 league, unless you've got 2 or 3 losses, you're going to be in the discussion. But then it's just a matter of comparing resumes.
Yeah, and the key is always avoiding the hiccup game. And that's happened to some other Pac-12 teams in the past where, Washington, maybe they get in. They don't lose to Arizona State for 1 year. Maybe Utah probably, if they go 11-1, they'll have a really good case. I mean, sometimes it doesn't work out. Look at Ohio State last year. They had one bad night. But I think in the Pac-12, with the geography, with the way the conference is, the crossover games, I mean, as somebody once, I think Mike Leach once pointed out to me, I don't have the mileage on it, but Tucson to Pullman's a long trip. And, with all that in mind, I think it's just avoiding that one road loss that can pop up at any time.
Yeah, if your road loss is in Seattle, that's one thing. If your road loss is at Corvallis, that's another thing.
Yeah, exactly. So, I mean, if you lose one to one of the better teams, sure, you'll still get looked at. So I don't think the prognosis for the Pac-12 is as dire as some others think. I do think you got to fight for the time slots, and I would try to push games up if you can, and try to get into those games. As you're seeing with Fox, they're putting their bigger games on at noon, and I don't think you can play a 9 a.m. game in the Pac-12, but who knows? And I think that's just being flexible with that, and trying to eliminate some of this East Coast bias. I watch them all, but as you know, I'm pretty committed. I'm kind of one of those junkies that's hopeless is going to stay up all night anyway.
Well, you'd like to think the committee watches them all too, though, Bill. And my question is, do they? Do all the committee members have the Pac-12 network? Do all the committee members stay up to 11:30 or 12 or 1 in the morning East Coast time to watch a key game like that? That's really the key today. It's not you and I in the media anymore casting votes. It's those 10 people on that committee, and I wonder how many of them are staying up or have access to the Pac-12 network.
No, that's a great point. And, as we move forward, I think they do, but I think, the Pac-12 is still, I don't want to say it's kind of considered on the lower end of the Power 5. I mean, it seems like they've been rotating between the Big 12 and the Pac-12, but I would also argue that the ACC right now has the feel of a Clemson and everybody else, and that everybody else, like, what's the difference between Pitt, who played for an ACC championship, and I don't know, Arizona State right now.
Sure.
I don't think it's significant at all. So, but I do think the Big Ten and SEC do have a little bit of a edge in terms of number of competitive playoff contenders over the rest of the Power 5 right now.
Let me ask you, Bill Bender. Bill Bender from Sporting News and Street and Smith's preseason magazine, which is on the newsstands now with us here at the Bill Riley Show. We all know the SEC, the records say it, the championships say it at the top, certainly the best. And I think most would concede top to bottom, probably most years the SEC. But you tell me, top to bottom, who's the second best conference in college football?
I would still say the Big Ten, I think, because of the Big Ten West. Well, if you stacked up the Big Ten and the Pac-12, I think the Big Ten East is better than the Pac-12 North, because I would take Ohio State, Michigan, Michigan State, Penn State over what the Pac-12 has at the top in the North. Now, the Pac-12 South and the Big Ten West are very similar. I mean, and I say that because right now, if you ask me to pick a Big Ten West winner, you're throwing 6 darts. And I think the Pac-12, if things go wrong for Utah and they do, in fact, mess it up,
you're throwing darts.
You could throw darts at 4 other teams to win that division, too.
So but the favorite's Wisconsin in the West, right?
Not necessarily. I mean, I think it's on them to reprove themselves and throw the ball down the field a little bit.
So you think it's wide open. You think the West? See, I think the Pac-12 South, Utah's clearly the favorite, but you're saying the Big Ten West is wide open, or at least 3 or 4 teams.
Yeah.
Okay.
I'm saying that everybody not named Illinois feels like they can win the division and probably has some merit to that. But at the same time, I think that division, they'll end up all going 9-3.
And then somebody's going to get beat up in the Pac-10 or the Big Ten championship game by Ohio State or Michigan. Who's going to win that?
More than likely, yes.
Is this the year, if there's going to be a year that maybe Michigan actually gets that breakthrough?
Well, I mean, we're going to find out. I think this is their opportunity. They've got a team that's very good. And if they open up the offense with Josh Gaddis and Jim Harbaugh, and they let Shea Patterson throw to some NFL-caliber receivers, we might see that. I think some of the criticism of Michigan's overblown. They've won 10 games 3 of the last 4 years. That's not bad. But to that point, I mean, it's about beating Ohio State, and they haven't done that in a few years.
Bill Bender writes for Sporting News, and he also is a big contributor to the Street and Smith's preseason football magazine, which is out and on newsstands today. Bill, thanks for jumping on today. We'll give you a little reprieve for the summertime and then catch you later in the summer as camp begins. Sound good?
Hey, sounds good. Thanks so much.
Thank you, Bill. Bill Bender with us from Street and Smith's College Football Magazine.